Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guests are two brothers who started, bootstrapped, grew, and sold their company successfully. That's David and Chris Sinkinson, who built AppArmor. They did it in Toronto. They served the college market here and universities in North America with a safety app that was quite a simple iPhone app when it started, turned into a messaging and safety platform, and quite excited. Competed with private equity backed competitors and sold the company themselves and split $40 million between the two brothers. Have both on the episode this week. David talks about the business side, Chris talks about the product side, and like brothers do, they both overlapped and talk about what they learned, what did it work, what they're doing again, and about their new book called Startup Different. It's a great episode. And we're live with Dave and Chris Sinkinson, the co-founders and brothers, the CEO and CTO of AppArmor, which they grew together, built together, and sold together. And now we're going to look back at that journey today. It's a new version of the Practical Founders podcast where we've got the co-founders on the show here today. So welcome to the Practical Founders podcast, Dave and Chris.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Yeah, great. Well, we're already doing that. Who gets to speak first and, go back and forth there. So I guess I'll have to direct traffic, but it's a great chat here. And as always, it's like we're founders talking to each other about the nitty-gritty of the journey in front of a crowd of practical founders who want to hear some of that nitty-gritty and the details and another version of how you did it. Dave, why don't you just explain what AppArmor is? I know you've sold the company, you created it, and we'll have Chris explain what it was in the end when you guys sold it for a serious price, and then we'll go back to the journey of what you guys did together to build it here. So, Dave, tell us about AppArmor in the world.
Absolutely. So it's kind of an interesting product, very much in a niche market. So basically, it's something called a mobile safety app, is sort of our flagship product at AppArmor. And what that is, or perhaps just a little bit of the origin story, is that so I was working at my alma mater, and we did an audit as a part of a committee that I was on. We did an audit of our blue light emergency poles on campus. So these are these poles when you press the button. Basically, campus police knows where you are, and then come help you. If you're running away from someone, they tell you, keep pressing the buttons, and so we can see where you were and where you're going, kind of get a sense of that. And so we did an audit of these poles and found that about 30% of the poles were broken. And so kind of just being in the right place at the right time, I just sort of pitched, what if you had a mobile app where you could just press a button and it would call campus security at this particular institution? And that is really the genesis of it. So it went from this incredibly simple concept of, public safety mobile app, just almost just like a phone number dialing app, all the way to, not that long after, we're sending real-time location of the user to the campus security group because so they can see the user. It's like innovating on the concept of those poles, making them much more efficient. And actually, incidentally, those poles cost quite a bit. So it was actually a more affordable and efficient solution for a lot of organizations. And every single app we made was also branded to the organization we worked with. So what was interesting about us is that, if you were to go into the App Store, we weren't you wouldn't find much under AppArmor. But if you looked up UCLA Bruin Safe or NYU Safe NYU or University of Florida Gator Safe or, insert school name, it's probably, prefixed or suffixed with the word safe. That's one of our mobile applications. And so, we at our peak, we had about 350 to 400 different organizations on the platform. And it actually had 50 plus features. So it did a lot more than just that initial emergency call. You could send emergency notifications, which are obviously very, very important, and a little bit more ubiquitous now in society. And then there's also, send your location to a friend so they can watch you as you walk home. There was if you're working by yourself on campus, there was a check-in system, tons of technology, basically to be sort of this proactive and reactive safety tool for end users on sort of big facilities and college campuses.
So you white labeled this software and probably had, a menu of features you could build in for a particular university. I guess you started it in your hometown of Kingston, Ontario in Canada at Queen's University. I guess you were both going to school there.
That's right.
Something like that. And you were involved in that. So this was, it started off with, there's an app for that. And let's see if we can build a button that you could push and do that. And it turned into a real thriving business. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I was, I literally in the room, I'm pretty sure I said there's an app for that as part of my pitch for this. You got to remember, this was back in like 2011, right? So the App Store is just sort of brand new, it was a new territory for a lot of people. It was, I actually this puts it in context. I had a BlackBerry. Okay. So, this is really like, that's the time period we're sort of talking about. So yeah, for sure.
That's amazing here. So Chris, the company grew. Let's just remind or let people know, what happened a few years ago. You guys had built the company up. You sold the company. How big was the company when you sold it? Can you talk about employees and revenues? And
a lot of things happened really quickly, kind of when we went into that acquisition phase. And we were hitting on all cylinders, I guess is the best way to describe it. So revenues are really growing. The ARR was just, hockey stick, heading north. So we're really happy we're on the upswing.
Does that mean something different in Canada than for us here? Like, is it even steeper climb up there? With a hockey
more
stick
of a curve on the end of the stick. I don't know. We're making things.
We're gonna check that curve. It's an illegal curve.
Yeah, it's an illegal curve. Yeah, for sure.
No, but it was. We were really on the upswing. The sales were just taking off. Something happened. I don't know, maybe about a year before we were actually acquired, where somehow we got on everybody's radar from an acquisition perspective. We started getting emails and phone calls, organizations that buy software companies. And then we also got reach outs from some of our competitors because obviously we were winning deals that I think they were pretty comfortable winning before. And they were like, who are these guys? And we were really trying to, we started with the apps and then product proliferation. We added mass notification, some of those things. And we looked at like, how can we do these things better? Like not like just an us two type of approach, but like, how can we actually innovate on these different platforms? So everything from like sending SMSs to, one of these really simple innovations that we did was every one of our SMSs had like, those bit.ly URL shorteners. Every SMS that we sent had a unique to the recipient URL baked into it. So that let us like track if people
there you go.
Tapped it. Yeah. So, and our competitors weren't doing that. And so we had this incredibly detailed tracking that nobody else was doing. And we really went deep on a lot of those mass notification features.
I think the other thing though, too, in terms of why we were on everybody's radar was by, I think 2019, we were one of the 200 fastest growing companies in Canada, and we were actually 30th in software. Yeah. So for software companies. So I think that if you're a company looking to buy companies, you're probably going to go, okay, let's start with that list and see where we land. So, we had triple digit growth for pretty consistently for, I think it was like 5 years, triple digit growth. So, obviously when you're smaller, that's, it's a bit of number bias going on in there, but it was really significant year-over-year growth. And this is tied to a lot of that product proliferation and some of the work you were doing.
Exactly. So, we are obviously sitting there and like, who are we going to be more valuable to? Yeah. And obviously the competitors were the ones that really saw more value than just a kind of a financial play, by the company. Right. And then,
strategic versus a financial buyer.
Correct. That's the word I'm looking for. Strategic. Thank you. Yeah. But so we obviously had some initial conversations with those strategic competitors, very high level without, giving away the secret sauce or anything like that. And one of them definitely showed a lot more interest than the other one. That ended up being Rave Mobile Security out of Boston. And lo and behold, they made us an offer. And Dave likes to tell this terrible story.
I was wondering if you were going to say it or not.
I'll let Dave. So we're switching off here, Dave. I'll let you tell your side of the story here.
Sure.
It's been documented on the other side. So.
Yeah. Well, we've got some other fun Canadian podcast hosts and authors up here. So if anybody's heard my John Werlow interview,
of course.
Now, the only thing about that was that it was just me on that show, so Chris couldn't actually respond. So I enjoyed this moment. So basically, what happened was we were in the room. We were on the Zoom room basically with Rave, and we're kind of going back and forth. And they had put an offer in front of us for about $20 million. And it's not every day that something like that happens. And we were like, wow, this is really interesting. It was like an offer that we were really fascinated by, but we actually ended up turning it down. And here's what happened. So when we were in that conversation with them, they said to us, they kind of, and in a good sales negotiation, you never give away, what you would actually do it for. You don't give away the budget. You're very,
the sales guy here, the sales brother.
The sales guy. Okay. And so Chris, so they say to Chris, and I thought it was actually pretty bold of them to do this, but they said, at what number, guys, would this work out? Well, what do we got to do here to make this happen? And so without hesitation, Chris just goes 20 million. Just like boom, 20 million right away. And I think Chris wasn't with me in the room at the time, but if I could have, I would have punched him or something, because we had totally blown it on having a kind of a position where we could build some value and get as much as we could. And instead,
all right, now, Greg, I have to chime in here to crawl myself
thank you.
under the
Thank
bus
you.
for a moment. So this is a big misunderstanding. Okay. So obviously Dave and I are 50-50 owners. I was just saying that for my 50%, I was looking for 20. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And everybody has turned this into that was the price for everything. So,
I totally believe you.
Well, that wasn't the price they paid for it. So I think they heard an offer. We'll get to that in a minute here. But a year or so later, you had a COVID boom and you kept on growing. Let's just get to the punchline. You guys sold this bootstrapped, self-funded, revenue-funded business for $40 million.
That's right.
Is that 40 million Canadian, presumably, or 40 million US?
Yep.
Or
Canadian.
And split it between you. What year was that?
2022, I think it was February 1st of 2022, the money actually hit our bank accounts. It was a sign and close. So we signed and told all our staff on, I think it was January 18th.
That's right.
And then it was the scariest week and a half of wow, everybody we're part of this new company now, but we haven't actually got the money yet. So
our lawyers were very nervous.
Yeah. Everything went fine, but it was a little bit nerve wracking.
Well, and I should say that January 18th was a crazy day for our staff. So they coming in, we could not tell them.
Surprise.
We were under NDA, right? So, so the start of the day, we meet with key staff, our executive team. There's just 3 other folks and Chris and I. And we're just like, okay, so heads up, we are being acquired by this other company today. And they're just like, they couldn't believe it because we had done a really good job hiding it, quite frankly. And we were trying really hard to do that. Then about an hour later, we told the entire team and said, hey, just so you know, we're joining a new company today. And then about an hour after that, they all met their new CEO. And then about 3 hours after that, they joined the all company kickoff of this new company.
Welcome.
And they were like, look, it's all those AppArmor people that we used to compete with all the time. They're so nice. Da, da, da. And it was just the next day, we had a couple of staff come to us and go, was that a dream? Did that actually happen? So it was pretty wild.
Yeah. I've been on both sides of that one here. How many people were on the team when you sold AppArmor to Rave Mobile Safety in 2022?
Yeah, we had a headcount of about 20 people. We had a few vacancies, but our headcount was 20 by the time we were doing that.
So. Can you say what your revenues were at that time after you'd grown profitably for years?
Chris, you're going to correct.
Such a
keep me on. I want to say 6 to 6.5 million ARR. I would say
north of 6.5, somewhere just shy of 7, maybe at that point. It was changing. We were going through due diligence, and Dave and I were doing all the due diligence work. So we were still closing deals. We were adding revenue all through that.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, it was brutal.
I appreciate that.
But I don't know where it actually ended up, right at the last moment, because we did have really gangbusters months as we were going through due diligence and everything like that. Yeah. So I think it was just shy of 7 million ARR. Yeah,
sure. Sounds about right.
Well, that's one of the things that practical founders get to do is you guys are building this company, and I guess you got an offer around 20 million, that was maybe nudged by Chris, your hint there. They put an offer and you guys said, no, thank you. You said no politely to a strategic offer and went and grew the business even faster and probably punched him in the face even faster.
Stepped on toes.
Nimble competitor.
Say it, But I would say too that, the original offer at 20 million had a lot of strings attached that we just weren't comfortable with. There was a pretty bad earnout in our estimation. There was sales targets that, it's really difficult to understand how potent you're going to be in the market when you join another firm, let alone a strategic, because, like now
you don't have control over your growth, but as much as you think you have. Yeah.
And the other curveball is that I was expecting my first trials in that time window. And I was like, I'm not sure if I want to really commit to like sales numbers I don't understand, sales enablement in the new company, all the other transition that has to happen. And I can't even imagine trying to do due diligence during that. Like, my God, I'm really glad we didn't do that. Even that alone is insane. I think basically sleep would have been off the table if we had agreed to the original deal. So
we said, no thanks, but no thanks. And we went back and we really took this as an opportunity to clean up stuff that we weren't happy with. So like financials, the way just contracts, we had a little bit of tech debt that I wanted to get rid of.
No, there's no tech debt, CTO. There's no such thing as tech debt.
Like really annoying tech debt that I was embarrassed by, I was able to get rid of.
Strategic tech debt, yes.
But it was less embarrassing. And then, like weird things like some of our documentation was out of date. And I just wanted to have all that stuff polished before we went and had another conversation.
Contracts too.
Yeah. And then the other thing that happened too is we had all these safety apps at these different universities, and it was right around the time.
How many universities, pardon me, Chris, how many universities did you have by this time?
350 at that point?
Well, no, that's 350 is the total number of customers. I would say somewhere between 275 to 300 were universities and colleges specifically.
Almost all universities,
Yeah. But everybody was talking about, it was pandemic. It was like back to school. We're going to come back to campus, all that sort of stuff. There was a lot of talk about vaccine verification. And I said to Dave, I said, I just think we should have this in the hangar if we need it. And so I wrote a version 1 over a weekend, like literally that kind of thing. Now, we were really good at adding features to our platform at that point because we had built frameworks for ourselves to be able to do that kind of stuff. So it wasn't much of a stretch. There was a little bit around those QR codes that governments were issuing, which were digital health cards, I think is what they were actually called. So we had to write some code to actually decode those and kind of match up the data and some things like that. But we had that. I showed it to Dave. Dave did a demonstration to a whole bunch of our clients. He gets off the call and goes, wow, we're going to be rich. Everybody wants it. Okay. And then
the sales guy for you. Sales guy BS. You know what I mean?
2 weeks later, Dave's like, yeah, nobody wants it. Total waste of time. Total waste of time. Not going to happen. Okay. Then fast forward about a month. And that's when the government started coming out and saying, no, you have to verify vaccination status. And then Dave's like, we're going to be rich.
I'm pretty sure I literally was like, hallelujah, this is happening. So
so this is between the initial offer and before we got our $40 million that we wanted. So you think about that upswing, we were really on the upswing at that point. So fast forward to, I think it was November, we get another LOI. 40 million clean, 3-month earnout, no strings attached, no sales targets, no nothing. Just, we want you guys. We're not screwing around.
A little bit more desperate. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So obviously, I think Dave was at a gas station making faces at his daughter sitting in the back seat of the car.
We cover this in our upcoming book too, Startup Different, your myth busting blueprint for multi-million-dollar business. And I'm literally at a gas station in Burlington, Ontario, because that's where my wife's extended family lives. We were swimming in. I think we had been in their pool, even though it was really late in the season. But anyway, and I'm just making silly faces at my daughter, and I get this email. It's like, oh yeah, we're willing to double the offer. And I think about 15 seconds later, I get a phone call from Chris going, holy shit, we're doing this, So anyway,
So it was a no-brainer at that point. We were like, okay, where do we sign? Let's rock and roll. So very exciting.
And it had been a 10-year journey. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Almost exactly 10 years, actually.
Yeah.
I think I looked at the day we actually registered the AppArmor.com domain name, and it was very close to the date that we actually closed the acquisition deal, 10 years later. It was ironically almost exactly a 10-year journey to get to that point. So, but very exciting.
It sounds like a perfect straight line with no bumps or bruises. And no brutal learning along the way, and no near-death moments, no lost weekends and lost years. None of that, right?
No, I think we had our ups and downs
Dave?
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
You know,
There was a business book that I loved, and they called it a Whiffio moment. We're effed. It's over.
Yeah.
Whiffio.
that's also in the book. I just can't remember who we attribute that to at this second.
But we definitely had some Whiffio moments where we thought, we have a serious problem here.
I can think of one like that. I think a lot of the folks listening today, being practical founders, can probably relate to this. But I think one of the things, and maybe Chris, you disagree, I'm not sure, but one of the things I found most challenging in the business was always managing the people.
Oh yeah.
I found the people and the HR elements and that to be, to inspire and motivate and lead extremely challenging and trying to be like, a mission driven organization. I think for Chris and I, and I think a lot of founders can relate to this, but we could work anywhere. Like we would work in a cave if it had Wi-Fi. We would do whatever it didn't matter. Like we were in no matter what. Like we'd be there long nights, weekends, whatever we had to do. And it was kind of surprising to us that we were pretty naive, I guess, but our first staff weren't really willing to do that, right? And I think that, and we actually had something really serious, which was our culture failure, where and this is really early on, but we had a set of employees that we started the business with in 20. So this is after it was Chris and I. So these are like the first folks. I want to say like 2014, 2014, yep. And basically, we tried to set up this culture. We're like, we'll just copy Netflix. Remember Netflix? They came out with that PowerPoint deck
with the culture slide deck. Yeah,
yeah. So everybody knows it. All founders know. And so we're like, we want to be a unicorn, so we're going to do exactly what Netflix does. So we follow all that, and it's just a total disaster. It just doesn't work out. We don't quite understand it. The staff don't understand it. They don't really like it, and neither do we even. And ultimately what happens is in about a 6-month period, we lose all those staff and we have to redo it. We have to restart it. But I remember having a moment kind of turning to Chris and going, wow, like, is it over? Like, are we done? Or are we still going to keep doing this? It was pretty scary, to be honest.
Yep.
So
glad we pushed through.
yeah.
Good thing you didn't raise funding in Toronto from a VC that says you got to hit your target in 18 months or you're out, right? And we're going to shut this thing down. You guys self-funded this, didn't quit your day jobs for a while, and then you guys got going. But, congratulations for getting to revenue and then staying lean until you could, get the business up, hire employees, and live through the bumps and bruises over and over again. So
we were fortunate. We were both kind of fresh out of school, willing to live in the cave with the Wi-Fi, weren't spending a lot of money. And I had a little bit of money saved up. Dave was in good shape and kind of did it as a side hustle for a little while, and we sort of made it work. Until we got to the point where we could say, okay, we can actually support ourselves with this. But it was tough at first.
Yeah.
How long did it take between your first experiments? Maybe there's an app for this and there's an app for that and there's an idea. You guys were brainstorming things. You found this one thing. How long did it take before here's another test and then, I think this is a thing. Let's go all in.
Yeah, I'm actually going to toss this ball to Chris because Chris being sort of the product guy, but I will just preface it with, we did have, one way that we were able to bootstrap is we did have about 4 or 5 different ideas on the go, all of them generating really, really small amounts of revenue, anywhere from like $5,000 to maybe max like
50 or
50, tops, kind of in one of them sort of in that land of the living. Yeah, land of the living dead though. It's not really going anywhere and it isn't really growing anymore. But anyway, I'll let you take this.
I use this analogy with Dave when we were back then, and I would say it's kind of like a brick wall. You build it one brick at a time, and at this stage, we're putting these smaller bricks on the wall to kind of support ourselves until we definitely got to a point where we said, okay, this is the winner. AppArmor is the winner. So I remember there was one business, we sold it off for not very much. There was one we just shut, a couple of them we just shut down. And a couple of them, the rest of them, I think we just let them go. Didn't bother pursuing them any further and said goodbye and just shifted to 100% AppArmor. And that was a real turning point because we knew we had enough revenue from that product that we could support ourselves and keep running.
So you already had revenue and customers giving you thumbs up from AppArmor.
That's
before
right.
You guys shed all this other stuff and said,
Yeah.
That's enough proof. Maybe it wasn't enough profit yet or revenue, but it was enough proof that you guys said this is the thing, and we could make a bigger idea out of this, a bigger company.
We also got a really good bounce. Like right after we kind of shed everything else, we actually, to Dave's credit, he threw our name into the ring for a statewide deployment in Colorado, all the community colleges in Colorado, and we won a deal for, I think it was 14 institutions.
13
institutions.
Lucky 13. Yep.
Yeah, all in one shot. And it was the safety app. It was kind of like the whole suite of products. So it was kind of like they bought everything they could possibly buy from us.
It was every community college in the state of Colorado.
Yeah. So we had kind of like we were barely scraping by, but we were scraping by, to then, oh, wow, now we've got serious money. Let's hire some people and let's really step on the gas. So that was really a big pivotal moment for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. There was a bit of a rough transition from sort of the other product we had and AppArmor, and we knew that shutting this one down meant losing a reasonable amount of revenue for us at that time. And it was kind of like, okay, how are we going to make this jump? And nothing, I think, motivates a sales guy more than, white hot fear. So it's just ended up being one of those situations where I was out there hustling because I was like, I don't, very selfishly almost, I don't want my standard of living to drop, but also I want the business to, be healthy and to be growing. And it was really a coup for us that after winning that put us in a great position to keep selling into sort of states that we had never played in before in the US. And so that was a really big deal for us.
Well, it sounds like you had a little combination of luck at the right time and all that hard work and living in the cave with Wi-Fi, right? And being prepared for it as you guys got through it. I'm thinking of the thousands of people I do back in 2009, 10, 11 that were building apps and thinking they're going to get rich. And I don't think any of them ever did. There's a few apps that are still standing, but it was hard to monetize and it was a big struggle and so forth. But you guys found your way through this app idea, and then the back end, platform. It wasn't a simple app, right? Obviously. So as you guys built it out here, it was like an emergency management system. In the end, right? With a server based and little clients that you could send notes to and text and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a couple of things going on there. When you think about the sort of the initial days of mobile apps, a lot of people tend to focus their attention on consumer facing mobile applications and how you're really trying to convince a lot of people out there to adopt the platform, and somehow users would eventually equal money. And for some people that just didn't materialize, right? And I think for us, remember that we did a couple things. Like, first off, is we were a B2B solution. Like, we were selling to an organization. That organization would pay the full Monty, and then the end user would get it for free. So it's a kind of the best of both worlds from a
B2B,
business perspective. Yeah. The
B2B to C.
The thing, exactly. So the thing that would be also interesting is that we really, really honed in on a very specific market niche. And I think most of the founders listening today would probably, I want to believe they would agree with me, but finding a highly loyal, very specific market niche is a business promised land. It is a good place to be. You will be successful if you convince the head honchos in that sort of market that, hey, this is a credible tool. It works really well and we should be adopting it. Once you sort of get to that critical mass, you cross that chasm, it is actually reasonably easy. And, we have our podcast now and we have all this other stuff. And we're in these consumer spaces. And I got to be honest, it's an animal. It's so brutal. Different, versus that B2B space. So I actually kind of miss it. I kind of miss that tiny market we had, relatively speaking, to, versus having this big market of like all business people. You know what I mean? It's just fascinating how that kind of plays out.
This week's podcast is sponsored by my friends at Cypress Growth Capital. My favorite milestone for practical SaaS founders is after you've survived the first few crazy years and you have some repeatable sales and a growing team and perhaps a little profit showing up. You could grow faster with a little outside capital, but the thought of raising money from VCs would change your whole game. And we know VC funding is the most expensive growth capital on the planet. That's why so many practical SaaS founders I know have partnered with Cypress Growth Capital when they hit that predictable growth inflection point. For 15 years, Cypress has provided non-dilutive growth funding to bootstrapped SaaS founders, including many of the successful founders I've had on this podcast. They love practical founders. Cypress provides enough patient capital for you to invest in your growth without giving up any of your precious equity or having to guarantee a loan personally. Their investment team has people like you who have grown and sold successful software and technology companies, and their operational and entrepreneurial experience helps them give you strategic guidance at those key inflection points in your business. So go to cypressgrowthcapital.com/practical and learn more, and contact Cliff Santel at Cypress to see if there's a fit. Now back to our podcast. Well, you guys talked about it earlier. Like, as you get to 200 and 300 universities, it's easy to walk into the next university and say, here are all the logos of the universities in your state or in your conference, that we already support, and it's already trusted. The credibility is way up there at some point. We've sent 7 billion notification messages and all that kind of stuff. But when it's early, it's just you two guys, handshaking and committed. So was this the Dave and Chris show? Dave would go sell something and then Chris would build it over the weekend, and you guys would go back and forth and, get this thing going?
More or less. Yeah. I tried my best not to future sell, but there are circumstances where, big name client needs the thing. I'll give you a good story on this. So we actually, a Canadian thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of the time, American firms don't tend to enter the Canadian market too quickly because, of course, the American market is so significant. So what's interesting is it creates kind of like an incubation space for Canadian businesses if they want to enter the U.S. later, because we're always watching the U.S. It's the market of first resort. So we're sort of sitting here watching, wondering, okay, when do we get in? And it was actually really hard for us to get in. We ended up getting a couple of small colleges, Jacksonville University, Medical College of Wisconsin. And, one day, but we were on like the radar. We were there. And then one day we basically get a phone call, because we've been doing all this outreach efforts and we've been, going to conferences and that stuff. And we heard from the University of Florida. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like, okay, that gator is a nationally recognizable symbol. And we basically, from our perspective, we did the sweetheart deal. We basically gave them the deal that our very first customer got. And by this point, we had probably about 30 to 50 customers in Canada. So it was like, it was actually a customer of that size would be paying a heck of 10 times more normally. But I and Chris and I understood that we needed this credibility in the American market with an American logo to be able to attack the rest of it. And we did get it. We landed that deal. And they also made us do some pretty funky custom development.
Yeah. I remember saying there was 2 developers at that point. It was me and one other developer. And I said to him, look, dude, we got to just do whatever they ask us to do. Okay. Because we got to make the Gators happy. And they actually called the app Gator Safe, which if you think of Gatorade, it was kind of recognizable. The graphics just looked amazing. It was
cool.
It was all of a sudden all over our marketing. It was so referenceable. And I think it really was a pivotal moment for us in the US market.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, that marquee customer. Most people don't know that Gatorade, that Gator brand came from the University of Florida, where they created that.
That's right.
100%.
Kind of thing. So, is this what you guys expected to do? You guys wanted to work together and create some entrepreneurial adventure, and you found a thing that was working, and figured it out, and got the University of Florida. Is this what did you think this was going to be? Did you think was like, it'll pay for your house and then we'll see what happens? Or were you trying to make a $1 billion save the world company and take over emergency notifications? What was your dream back then?
Yeah, I don't think we had as lofty a goal as that. I think we were very practical and just trying to be like, okay, like we got to pay our rents. We've got to, live. So we need to do something with this. I think we were really enjoying it. We'd just moved to the big city and everything. We were going to NBA games and
Toronto.
baseball games. And,
Toronto,
exactly. So, we were just kind of enjoying the ride, enjoying the journey. But I don't think if you would talk to, Chris of 2014 and say, hey, dude, by 2022, you're going to sell this for 40 million, that would have just blown my mind.
Yeah.
So absolutely astonishing where it ended up. Dave.
Yeah, I don't know. I think about this a lot, actually. Did we potentially aim too low or something like that? But the reality is I never felt like our business was going to be like the one that was going to go public or, be a big empire, like that kind of vibe. I think that, I had worked at a rather large telecom firm previously, and I didn't totally enjoy the experience. I like the people, actually. The people were great. I'll stand by that. But the work was really boring, and you just felt so far away from the customer basically all the time, and the mission of the company and all that kind of stuff. So I think my priority was more around, I want to do something that I care about while making a lot of money, is kind of like this general goal that we were working on. And we were pretty successful in doing that, but we definitely had our doubts too, like we alluded to. And there were, I think, what we would have hoped for an exit that was worth tens of millions of dollars. I think it's fair to say we'd have hoped for it. We didn't have a number. We were like, if it's this amount, we're definitely, well, I mean, if it's $100 million, I'm definitely going to do it. But you know what I mean? Like we weren't really thinking that way. It's just like, hey, if we get a bunch of money, maybe we'll think about it. But it was still like, it's got to be worth it. And it's also got to be sort of on mission with what we were doing.
Yeah. It had to definitely be more than 20 million.
Well, clearly, yeah. I guess you're definitely right.
Yeah, from what I heard, yeah.
That's the rumor going around. Yeah.
Just imagine you guys had moved to the big city, Toronto, and there's a very active tech scene there now in Toronto, and it started, it was pretty active 10 years ago, not so much 20 years ago, but it's picked up steam. There's a lot of investor interest there. At some point, as you guys grew this and got your team settled and we're starting, there was every month more universities and every year more growth and so forth. And I know you guys made this a pretty profitable company as opposed to, following what everybody else is doing. One of those myths, startup myths, is you just get funding and so forth. So at some point, you guys are growing and hitting $1 million or $2 million in profit and paying yourselves and feeling pretty good. But now you're in Toronto. And was this, you must have felt like a little bit of a different kind of tech story. You're not raising funding and you're not adding tons of people and you're not thinking about global domination and so forth. But, did you ever consider raising funding to grow faster, or that just really wasn't part of your plan? I know it's one of the myths of startups.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. So it's one of those things where I think the stat is something like, 75% of, funded or backed VC-backed startups also fail. So, it's this world of funding isn't necessarily like this panacea. It's not your way to guaranteed success. I think to answer your question directly, we did have one time where we thought about funding, and we went to this investor sort of program thing put on by our alma mater. And, we got kind of into some talks with somebody, but then, Chris and I were kind of like, it's a lot of work. You got to put a lot of, when you're bootstrapping, you're not thinking about the big spreadsheet, you know what I mean? And we were kind of like, well, why don't we just go and get more customers? And so that's just sort of what we did. I would say that there's a lot of other costs to getting funding. So there's obviously your equity position. Then there's sort of like company culture changes. For a while we were in a co-working space, and you could really tell the difference between Bootstrapped and sort of like this kind of calm sort of, and then you could tell the difference though with the ones that were funded. Or you could really tell on the founders when the main investor was coming in that day, because they are just shaking. They're a bucket of bolts. And it is kind of interesting. I really think that on the one hand, outside looking in, people would imagine that businesses that are funded, they would imagine that those are more stable. And I'd argue that they might have more life. Like generally speaking, the average is about 4 years for a venture capital funded business before it sort of goes belly up. And so, it's because they're riding that capital out. But, at the same time, it's not actually true that these businesses are like way more solvent or way more likely to be successful. But paradoxically, it's something that also like attracts some talent. Oh, you've got a bunch of funding, like that seems good to me.
Yeah,
So it's kind
follow
of
the
this
money.
weird, yeah, it's this thing. So we actually, I know I've alluded to the book a few times, but in our book, we have a section that's called Profit is Your Funding. And it's really all about this myth of how venture capital can actually hurt more than it helps. The other thing I'll mention too, just while I'm really crushing this topic, is that there's definitely this VC mentality of the get big fast. And I think about get big fast in our market, very slow moving, B2B, institutional sales. It just wasn't going to happen. If we had said, if we had taken $1 million and agreed to sales targets in our early days, we never would have hit it. Never. We needed time for that market to develop.
Yeah,
right?
we couldn't force them to buy, and it like when an institution is going to buy something, there's the committees, there's the internal sale that has to happen. And we got actually really good at doing that stuff. We really armed our champion in prospective clients with, prototype of the app, PowerPoint decks, like videos, things that they could share internally to kind of gather that momentum internally, make that happen. But best case scenario, it was still going to be a 6-month close if everything went perfectly. And then, we'd sometimes get right to the end and they'd say, oh, just don't have any money this year. We'll have another conversation next year.
I'll see you in a year.
Start over, So it was challenging. Our market would not have done the get big fast.
I don't think so anyway. Yeah, I don't think so. And actually, just thinking of another point that I really like on the venture capital piece is that, so we had competitors that were obviously funded by venture capital.
Yes, I was going to ask how many of those jumped in with funding and didn't last.
Yeah, exactly. So there were a handful for sure. I mean, I think our market consolidated from about 12 different companies down to basically 3 or 4 by the time we had sold, us being one of them. But what was really interesting though is that, so you could kind of sort of do a little bit of reverse math. So we found out that like one of our competitors, they had gotten, a bunch of funding and, we could back it down. They're selling it to this many schools. Long story short, we could sort of determine what their price was. Okay. So we could determine that they had made a promise to their VC that they were going to sell their software for like 30 grand a year. So, guess what? We're coming in at 25. We're coming in at 20. We're coming in at 15 because we could. To us, it was, that was still a substantial and meaningful amount of money, and it covered all the costs for sure. And, we were just able to make the market really uncomfortable for them.
I remember we had that whiteboard. We had this ginormous whiteboard in the back of the office that Dave and I shared.
Just a wall that we put up that wall, that paint stuff on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was a huge whiteboard, but we had this one little corner where it was the list of competitors that we took their initial, their marquee client from. And I think we were up to 8 or something. It was like pretty big before we had to finally wipe that corner of the whiteboard away. But there was a lot of them, as you can imagine.
Well, some of them were like pretty hokey pokey. You have like what I kind of call your trunk slammers, the guy sort of driving around selling stuff out of his trunk, like the really small time shops, which can be dangerous sometimes. It depends if they're also like developing the software themselves. I think they're a lot more dangerous in that circumstance. But, there's that. There's like the student groups on campus who, while the students in first year or their freshman year, they're making the mobile application and then they don't want to do it anymore by third year, fourth year. And then there was, the big venture capital and then like the sort of the established market players in adjacent markets. So, it was kind of like this mixed bag. But, of that group, it was a lot of small time players. Some in Canada, some in the United States. That we sort of dislodged.
But it was great though, because I remember University of Florida was one where we
that was actually one
competitor, and they disappeared after that. Vanderbilt University was another one.
Virginia
Tech was another one. So there was kind of like this. They would have one of our competitors' solutions. It would come up for renewal. They would go out to tender, and we would go at it hard, competitive pricing, feature set, everything. Because we would do anything to get rid of a competitor out of our space.
We would do anything with a good moral compass.
Yeah. We never did anything shady.
Yeah.
We were very competitive.
We used to call this moral ruthlessness, where you would kind of we were very ruthless when we had opportunities to be ruthless, but we were always taking the higher road. If there were moments where, something sketchy was happening, most of the time, I'm not going to say we're perfect because we definitely weren't, but we tried our best. We tried our best, Greg. But we had circumstances where we really tried to stay on that high road and be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, we did the right thing here, that kind of thing. So, yep.
Yeah, and you guys didn't run out of money along the way as you grew. It was relatively profitable business, right? You was growing 1, 2, 3 million, and you were starting to take money out, unlike your VC funded competitors.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd say our profitability probably peaked around 60% by our final year, which is tremendous.
I remember when we were being acquired, they were kind of having conversations with us about like salary expectations and things like that. And we essentially had a salary, but then we would dividend money out to ourselves periodically, depending on how things were going. And I remember they were kind of asking us, and I remember the CEO of Rave kind of said to us, like, so like, how's it going? I'm kind of was like, well, we're kind of making like pro athlete salaries right now. And then he was like, whoa. And then I was like, what? Not really like LeBron, more like, a rookie pro athlete salary. So he laughed.
Entry level rookie minimum salary in the NBA or something like that.
Yeah, but still huge numbers for us. And financially, like even before we sold and things like that, we were paying off mortgages. We were really doing hopefully wise things with our money. We weren't being silly about it. Always trying to, assuming the acquisition didn't happen, we wanted to be financially pretty secure personally, so that we had a lot of runway that we could fund ourselves if we did run into tough times with the business.
Yeah.
So you had a growing business that had finally crawled up this credibility mountain, right? You were starting to be one of the top tier. You could walk into any room and say, do the presentation of all the logos and all the history. And for you today, we'll do this and so forth. It was spitting out some profit for you guys. You had a bigger team, but it wasn't too big. And, you guys figured out a lot of systems and so forth. Why would you sell a company, even for $40 million? Why would you? Because you could have kept going and grown the profits, and maybe, I guess that's what your acquirer wanted to do, grow the profits bigger than the $40 million that they paid for it. So what was it that was the impetus for you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and a lot of people have actually asked me this. So the first thing I'll say was we were pretty darn tired. I think there's an exhaustion level of being a founder that it wears on you. And I'm sure lots of people listening today know exactly what I'm talking about. But I think you have to, so there's like a base level of exhaustion. So then we're going to add to that a global pandemic. Okay. And so a lot of things had changed, both just the mental stress of that was significant. But I would also argue that, we had a really, really good in-office vibe. Okay. We had an office space. We bought it in downtown Toronto. It's all built it out ourselves. It was amazing. And it was so great. And we did that in late 2019, or mid 2019. Yeah. And then it was like, we enjoyed that for like 6 or 8 months, and then wham, pandemic, and we were out of there. And, nobody wanted to be in the office anymore. And that really kind of sucked. And I think that was a tough one. And you could see the writing on the wall too, where like I was starting to, so me being the HR officer, switching hats there. And I started to gear up for, okay, we're going to start coming in at least a couple days a week, and we got to coordinate this and da-da-da. And I could tell that people were not down for it. It was going to be a mutiny of sorts. And then, thankfully, not thankfully, Omicron or whatever, one of the variants came along and sort of torpedoed the whole plan anyway. But, I think that was a really big one as well.
I think Dave and I talked about this, and we did love our culture so much, but we knew it was never going to be like that ever again. Yeah. And for me, it was crushing because I loved it so much. I lived across the street from the office. I could walk over there in 3 minutes. I just had the perfect setup, and it was never going to be like that ever again. And so that weighed on us a lot. The number was enormous. It was beyond anything we probably would have thought.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that is kind of like the offer you can't refuse. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. It was like one of those moments where it felt like a lot of money, and that for us to get to another offer like that, you can look at the future and you'll be adequately frustrated in trying to understand what your business is worth. Because on the one hand, you don't know when a global pandemic is going to happen. On the other hand, you don't know if like Taylor Swift is going to like wear one of your company's like t-shirts or something like that. Like you just don't know what the future holds, right? And so it was kind of one of those moments where I was like, this is a really good number. We can lock in, a generational level wealth, feels like this is kind of what we were trying to do. And we're both still pretty young guys. So it kind of felt like, if we want to do another thing later, which we might, it's kind of one of those things where, okay, maybe this is the time to do this. And, once they had doubled the offer, I mean, that was pretty tough to say no.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it didn't sound like a long conversation at the gas station there when the email came in. So it's like, let's do it.
Very little conversation.
Yeah. How long did it take between that conversation? We'll double the offer. We'll get you the paperwork and we'll start this. Before that and that day, you announced it to your team. Was that like
it was
6 months
November 18th,
or something? Or?
Yeah, no, it was pretty quick. It was November 18th.
The day?
Yeah.
Wow.
I do.
I'm very impressed by that.
Okay. November 18th, 2021. And then I remember this because our lawyers said, there is no way in hell this will close that fast. And the folks buying us, they were actually owned by TCV, Technology Crossover Ventures, out of New York. So
private equity, big
money,
big private equity,
sure.
And they wanted to move fast. They had their legal team was sending stuff to the Tokyo office to work on things overnight. Whereas our lawyer was in Kingston, Ontario. We were very fortunate, actually. Our legal team was amazing. They were Toronto refugees. They lived in Toronto. They worked for the big firms. They had sick of it and went to Kingston and had their firm there. So we used them. Incredibly good talent that we got out of such a small little town. But it was November 18th, 2021, and then the deal signed off on January 18th, 2022.
Pretty crazy.
And then by February 1st, the money was in our bank accounts. I remember over the Christmas break, I had the share certificates for the company. And I had to go over to their law firm's office in Toronto, and it was like right over the Christmas break or something like that. And it was a ghost town because it was still pandemic. So there was nobody in this office building. And I had to drop off these share certificates to their legal team because I happened to be nearby. But that was a big
I remember that was, peak due diligence there right around the week leading into Christmas and Christmas week. And I remember pretty sure it was Christmas Eve or maybe the day before. I'm up at like 11:30 p.m., talking to lawyers about something in due diligence. And I so underestimated due diligence. That was so difficult. I thought you just bought a business like you bought a car. They come on the lot, they kick the tires, they make, engine noises in the, in the driver's seat, and then they take it off the lot. We'll see, here are the keys, see you later. And instead, it is like, it's like somebody going through your house and like ripping all the drawers. It's like the FBI or something searching your house. Yeah. They're just ripping everything out. They're looking for absolutely anything.
It was everything. It wasn't just like every invoice. It was every line item on every invoice.
Incredible.
It was every line of every contract we had signed with customers, but also vendors. Incredible amount of stuff.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I kept saying to our staff, because our staff knew I was working on something, I'm like, we're being audited. That was my line is we're being audited. We're being audited, whatever. It's not a big deal.
I need this thing for the audit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we're cleaning the carpets. Remember? Yeah. Actually, this is a good story. If we got a second here, this is a good one.
So the Rave folks wanted to actually come up to Toronto and see us and meet us in person, but none of our staff knew this was going on, and we were keeping it just to Dave and myself. So we needed a day because some staff were starting to come back into the office every once in a while. So we told us,
don't come in. We're cleaning the carpets.
Yeah, exactly. The building happened to be actually cleaning the carpets in the hallways. So we said, we hired the same cleaning company. They're going to do our office carpets at the same time. So we send this out. And then that morning, our head developer, Austin, walks in, and I'm like, Austin, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, they're cleaning the carpets. You can't be here. And he's like, I was just going to I'll move when they need to do my office and then I'll move back or whatever. And I'm like, no. Yeah. You got to be out of here. It's too dangerous. So he actually left. And I swear he probably walked out of our building passing the CTO from Rave Mobile Safety in the lobby because it couldn't have been a few minutes later. Actually, sorry, it was the VP product that he would have passed in the lobby.
The CTO missed the flight.
Yeah, the CTO missed the flight.
Actually, because he had complications coming into Canada,
Yeah.
which is even funnier, to be honest. That
Couldn't use the app.
Brett's still, if he's watching this right now, he knows what he did, so it's okay. But anyway.
But yeah, it was a funny story that
Did you have to clean the carpets between you that night just to, make it smell like?
I was thinking because we never cleaned the carpets.
No one questioned that alibi at all. And the carpets did not smell like fresh or look any different. Anyway,
it's funny.
That's funny.
Well, I'm sure that was brutal, and of course, acquirers and the money behind the acquirers double check everything because they don't want to find of 20,000 bits of paper the one piece of paper that says if we screw up, we owe you everything. So they have to go through that. So. To find all the liabilities and just double check all that and make sure that the revenue is the revenue and the cost of the costs and the code is the code and all that good stuff, verifying the code. What did it feel like when this showed up in your bank account? And, I don't know, did you have another call where you said,
I was actually at the pediatrician's office with my daughter been born and everything. And is sitting there and I can't remember, just a normal checkup or something like that. Everything's fine. But then I just, feel my pocket buzz and it's a notice from my banking app. You have a new deposit of a lot of dough. And I was like, whoa. And I remember texting you like, hey, I think I got mine.
It was, I remember I was trying to move it from my checking account to my investment account and I couldn't do it. And then I went,
not enough zeros. Yeah.
So then I'm like, well, I'll go over to the branch and see if they can do this for me. And the teller at the branch is like, you want me to do what? And they couldn't even move it. So then they had to call I
didn't know this.
Yeah.
This is a big really problem for you.
It was very awkward.
How did you go? As if you went into the branch.
Because I thought a teller.
It's got to be a 1-800 number you call or something. That's hilarious.
Yeah, but got sorted.
You usually don't go to the teller. You go to the guy with the tie on that deals with
Go to where they have the door. The door closes in certain zones. That's the zone you want.
Actually, it's interesting because we always just went to the bank and went to the teller and did our banking and stuff like that. No big deal. I kind of knew the tellers that I would talk to. But then after that, that deposit, I get a phone call from the bank and they're like, yeah, you have a private banking expert now.
Yeah, congratulations.
And I'm like, I didn't know that is a thing. So it was very
Here's your coffee, sir. Yeah.
Breakfast is delivered at 7 a.m. every day for you, sir. Thank you. Wow. That's lovely.
It was interesting.
So there was the up, there was the down of COVID and the up of the revenue boost and then the down of due diligence and the up of the bank account boost and then the down. Was it down? I'm going to assume it's down when you join a new company and you're like, this isn't ours anymore. And there's new people and there's a new language. And was that any fun?
Yeah. Well, there were some fun components, but I think that one of the things that most founders that are acquired, I think they kind of sort of half think about what that experience is going to be like on day one of a new company. You don't have that many first days.
They don't even know. Most founders don't even know what to expect. So,
exactly. Right. And so for us, to Rave's credit, Rave Mobile Safety's credit, they did give us a lot of space at first, kind of all right, sort yourselves out, keep making money and we'll figure this out later. But then, after about 3 months or so, it started getting more serious. And over time, it felt increasingly good, but also weird. So basically, by the end of this process, trying to do sales enablement and moving people off to other managers and stuff like that, I was a VP in Rave Mobile Safety with absolutely no reports. Nobody reported to me. And that was kind of mission accomplished, right? That's what I was trying to do, trying to get myself out of the business. But it was definitely a bizarre feeling. The other thing too is that, because it was just Chris and I running the show on our side, Rave being a company about 10 times our size, they had the CEO, the CTO, the CRO, the CFO, the chief
information
HR
security,
and information security officer. They had the whole team. And so Chris and I would be working with 5 or 6 people at the C-suite level on any given day. And so that was kind of an interesting, complicated experience as well.
Yeah. And then to top it all off, so Rave Mobile Safety was then acquired by Motorola Solutions while we were employed there. And so that ended up being December of
same year,
2022. So we were acquired February 1st, I guess was the official, or January 18th, the official date, 2022. And then I think it was December something 2022. They were acquired by Motorola Solutions, which was the worst kept secret in that organization. I think everybody sort of knew, and everybody was kind of like asking questions on, what do you know? What do you know? Have you heard this? And it was all over the place because they had to have so many people involved in the due diligence that
I'm sure
a lot of people knew, and it was hard to keep the lid on it. But
and that acquisition was about just over $500 million.
Yeah, that was $560 million US for that acquisition. So it was a really big deal. And then 4 months after that, Dave and I kind of said, well, we got them through.
It's been real.
It was time for us to get out of the way. Yeah, we were very opinionated, or I was very opinionated about a lot of the things that we were doing with our products and stuff like that. And I could tell they were going to want to change some of those things. And I didn't want to be the person that was standing in the way of that. So it was, and Dave had no reports, so he wasn't doing anything. So
hey, whoa. I was still doing stuff, but I think, I felt like what was happening was a little bit weird, which was fine. I was kind of the guy out there kind of being the linebacker for our team. Yeah. And also another thing that founders kind of get wrong when they come into another company is that it's not about like one culture winning, over the other. It's about getting the best out of both the cultures and to bring those teams together. I found that because I was still there, I was definitely an unofficial team leader of a lot of teams. And I knew that I also really had to get out of the way for the growth of my people and frankly, for the acquirer to be able to move on without us and
so
move the business.
Our last day was March 31st of 2023.
That's right.
And we went out for dinner with all of our former staff and had a great time.
Lots of espresso martinis.
Yeah, espresso
nice.
martinis
very nice.
At the end. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then, Dave and I gave each other a big hug and cried next to Lake Ontario at the end of it. And it was really traumatic. We woke up the next Monday and like, whoa, what am I doing now? And then Dave said, hey, why don't we write a book?
And now here we are.
Now here we are. So. Yeah.
Just do something. Well, let's talk about it. I'd love to get both of your perspectives on it. This is the long and hard journey, and there's dragons to slay along the way and caves to get through and so forth, and most don't make it and so forth. When you look back on it now, do you look back and say, geez, we were lucky, or we're really hard work, or we want to do this again, or how do you guys put this in perspective? You guys won a prize. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And, change the way safety is done for universities. Yeah. So you helped move an industry. But how do you look back on this journey and what's next?
Well, to your point, I would say that I do feel pretty lucky. And that's in lots of different ways. I think I feel lucky in general that this was even a thing that could happen to me. I mean, you can run a really good, well-systematized business and not be acquired. That's normal. I think that I feel very fortunate about that. I do think, one of my favorite podcasts, which I'm sure everybody here knows, is How I Built This with Guy Raz. And it's interesting how, no matter what level of
question comes up.
No matter like what level of founder you are, there is at some point in that episode, and whoever it is, they'll say, and then this is when we got really lucky with this thing. So I do think that, you think of kind of that, I can't remember, it's Jim, anyway, I can't believe I can't remember this right now, but the return on luck, like that whole concept.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But anyway, the idea that you can be like in a position to be very lucky. And I think that that's ultimately what happened. We had built a well-systematized business. We were a mission-driven organization. We were solving a problem that mattered. Our people cared about it. We really did well in a specific niche. But we just happened to do a lot of those things. I mean, we had business training, but I still think we did a lot of those things, right, effectively, but almost not necessarily totally by accident.
Yeah.
But we definitely got some good bounces.
I think the definition of luck is like the convergence of preparation and opportunity. And I know we did a ton of the preparation. We did a ton of work to try and really run a solid business. And then opportunity, I think we tried really hard to put ourselves in a position where we were maybe going to get lucky, where you can't like force an opportunity, but to be in that conversation. So I think it was a combination of those two, and then fortunately the stars or the moons aligned or what have you, and our acquisition happened.
Yeah. 100%.
That's Jim Collins, The Return on
Yes.
Luck, the famous Jim Collins.
Thank
right, of
you.
course.
I can't believe it. Jim Collins. Like, he's pretty notable.
Yeah.
I feel dumb that I couldn't remember that one. Anyway, it's all good. That's great.
You guys sound like, crazy brothers attacking this market, doing whatever it takes and living in the cave and so forth. But you seem, I know, Dave, you read a lot of business books, and Chris, you've thought very systematically about the architecture of this so you could build this monstrous system without a lot of people. You guys had a lot of structure in your business. There was a little of the scrappiness, the startup scrappiness and the structure that you guys had. It wasn't just all, energy, and it wasn't all process.
Yeah, I think, we actually relatively recently, we had an article that we were able to write for Fortune magazine, and we posted it on LinkedIn and, all that kind of jazz. And we got quite a few comments from previous customers. Yeah. And a lot of those comments were like, oh, this is so great. And some of those comments, like, it's because you guys are like, effectively, I'm just paraphrasing, but effectively, like, you guys are good people. Like, this is why this happened, because you worked really hard for us and you cared. And I do think that it's easy in all this business training and all these different things and all the systems and all that to kind of lose focus on, how much did you actually care about the customer?
Yeah. Some of those comments, like, it made me kind of sad because I really miss some of those people. Like, I worked very closely. I think of the guys at Texas A&M. I worked so closely with those guys
Marlon and Tracy.
and had really good relationship with them. And don't get me wrong, they were Texans. They were going to tell you if they were upset about something. They're going to tell you, like, really clearly that they were upset about something. But regardless of that, they were just great people to work with as well. So I think, one of the things I miss the most is like the people, the amazing relationships we had with people, and not being able to see them, nearly as often, just kind of seeing them in LinkedIn comments and things like that. Yeah. So
you're off now with your Startup Different podcast and the new Startup Different book that's coming out here. As I am, we're off the field and we're helping a new generation of founders here. Why don't you tell us about Startup Different?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's our book pre-orders in September, so right now, and comes out October 1st. It's the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million dollar business. And basically the gist of it is there's a bunch of things happening, but I guess on the top is that we bust 33 different startup myths. Things that we actively experience, and we tie that into our company's journey. And so, and for what it's worth, we also add like quite a bit of humor. So we try to kind of make it pretty light. This isn't, some business books, they're going to take one idea and stretch it out really long, or they're going to be very academic. This is a fun read. This is an entertaining read. But you're going to get a lot from it. And frankly, it's a bunch of lessons that, looking back on how we did our business, I wish I had known them 10 years ago. And so I'm really hoping that helps. And then, of course, that's what we're doing with our podcast too. We're trying to get out there, talk to founders, get good lessons out there, share valuable insights. And really, we're just paying it forward. We're paying it forward, just like you are, Greg, to, entrepreneurs, and help them do better, frankly, than we did. Learn from our mistakes and from our wins. Yeah. Just one thing I would add is, there's a lot of business books where it's like one idea and they string it out for about 200, 250 pages. This is like, dozens of ideas that we try and really nail home with a good example from us. And sometimes often it's things that we did wrong. It's things that like, don't do that. This is a mistake we made. Don't do this. The one other thing I'd add is if you see a footnote, read it. Yeah. Because we had a lot of fun with the footnotes. They're very cheeky. They're very entertaining footnotes, usually popular references. Yeah. I know Pokemon is referenced in at one point, and a couple of Zoolander references. Everybody's a winner. So yeah, it's very cool. So that's at startupdifferent.com, I presume? That's correct. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Awesome. And your podcast is there. I'll have links to all of that, and including some of the other vendors and links that we talked about here in the show notes for the podcast here. I'll give the mic to each of the brothers here. Last bit of advice for practical founders out there. Maybe it's a gem from your book or something else that you'd like, like the Tim Ferriss billboard. What would you like to say to those practical founders, having lived through the journey, come out on the other side and looking back here? I'll start with you, Dave. Yeah. Sure. I can't help myself. I just want to talk. I'm a sales guy, right? I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give you is really ignore that startup noise. We had lots of people who I kind of loosely refer to as haters throughout our experience. People who said that, everything from, we're a lifestyle business to this idea is never going to work to you're going to get sued into oblivion to one person literally told Chris one time that we weren't a startup. So, there's ignore those people. Don't pursue validation in your peers. Pursue validation in the market instead. And that's been, I think that was a big change for me a couple of years into the business that really, really helped me stay on track.
Yeah, I think when I think about my piece of advice here is enjoy the journey. I've still stolen this one from Mehdi Basiri, who we actually interviewed back at the Collision Conference in Toronto, and it stuck with me since he said this.
CEO of Applyboard, right?
Yeah, so, I think when you're in the position that Dave and I are in, the thing you miss the most is the journey, and I'm a little bit jealous that our former staff are on that journey still, and they're having those good times, and that is by far the thing I miss the most. So when you're running your startup, you're gonna have good days and bad days, but boy, just understand that you're having the best journey of your life and really try and enjoy every minute. So yeah, that's cool. That's where I come in. Yeah.
Very nice, Chris. Very nice.
Awesome. Thanks for that great advice. Congratulations on a successful journey. And I think it'd be successful whether you sold the company or not. You both grew, you changed the world, made some profit along the way, and you had a prize. So congratulations to both of you. Thanks for joining me on the Practical Founders Podcast.
Thanks so much, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Thanks for watching this week's founder interview on the Practical Founders Podcast. Be sure to hit like and then subscribe to my Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly videos for serious software founders who are building valuable companies without big funding. Check out my blog and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com. And follow me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going. See you next week.